And please, like I said, if you don't mind, consider turning off your video. That would, that might be helpful. So good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. My name is Howard Cohn, and I'd like to welcome you to the initial lecture of our Fired Up series. And it's brought to you by the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. If you're not a member of the Art Alliance, we'd encourage you to join us as we pursue our mission to further the development and appreciation of art made by glass, from glass, excuse me. Today, we're fortunate to have two glass artists and co-directors of the Washington Glass Studio, Michael Janis and Erwin Timmers. And the third director, Tim Tate, is also on the, is with us as we begin. As Demetra said a few moments ago, our series is going to be each month on the third Tuesday. So you might want to mark your calendars.
One moment, I didn't find.
Siri is talking to me, I apologize. You may want to mark your calendars for October 20th when glass artist Lucy Lyons, just artist Lucy Lyons, is going to talk about her evocative and poignant glass sculptures. Today, Michael and Erwin are going to help demystify public art for us. And in a moment, I'll turn the screen and talk over to Michael and Erwin. But first, let me introduce you to the directors of the Washington Glass Studio. It was founded in 2001 by glass artists and artists Tim Tate and Erwin Timmers. And it's well known for amazingly detailed dimensional glass artwork. In 2004, Michael Janis joined the studio. And with his background as an architect, the Washington Glass Studio has successfully won and completed many public art commissions. The three studio directors include Tim Tate as the co-founder. Tim is a sculptor who has been working in glass, steel, concrete, and ceramic materials since 1989. He oversaw a glass casting production studio in New Orleans. Tim's artwork has been shown in many galleries and museums, including the permanent collections of the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Mint Museum, the University of Richmond, and the University of Virginia Art Museums. Tim is a Fulbright scholar and is one of the artists that represented the USA in Glass Stress, a collateral event of the Venice Biennale. Erwin Timmers is, together with Tim, a co-founder and director of the Washington Glass School. He is one of the DC area's leading eco artists. His work in sustainable design are seen in some of the large public art projects, including the EPA's DC headquarters and artwork for their LEED certified Safeway supermarket in Bethesda, Maryland. Michael Janis was an architect for 20 years in the USA and in Australia, a Fulbright scholar as well. Michael was an artist in residence at the Institute for International Glass Research and the Massachusetts Fuller Craft Museum had a solo show of Michael's work. And in addition, he received the Washington, DC Mayor's Art Award for Excellence in the Art. Together at the Washington Glass Studio and as the Washington Glass Studio, the artists recognize that the integration of art with architecture turns public spaces into people places. Love that last line, Michael. Well written. So please join me. We're going to welcome Erwin and Michael. I'm going to turn the podium over to them and we'll begin learning about how the Washington Glass Studio has done some great public arts sculptures and installations. Thank you.
Thank you, Howard.
Thank you.
It's great to be here and part of the Art Alliance for Contemporary Glass. I really appreciate this opportunity to talk with everyone and show what we're working on. I'm going to share the screen. There you go. Share. There you go. It should be there, right?
Yes, we're seeing you.
You guys are seeing this?
Yep. Okay. And I'll just kind of get us going along. The Glass School is made up of 3 directors, Tim Tate, Erwin Timmers, and myself. And we each come from a different background and a different way that we approach art. And that really has been one of our strong points, is that we each draw from a different knowledge base, and that we've learned to work well with each other, that we actually build upon each other's strengths. Where I might be lacking in something, Erwin has a very strong background in metalworks and steel sculptures, that we can start talking about fabrication. Tim has a great design sense, and his ability to work in many different mediums means that he can ideate a lot of concepts that we can start saying, how about we go this direction or that direction, which you do need a kind of flexibility when you're working in large scale commissions. And I come from an architectural background, so I'm always thinking about very much on schedules and dates and deliverables, and saying, how do we break it down to an achievable project? Tim's background, he actually was one of the designers. He won an international design competition for the New Orleans AIDS Memorials, and I think that was in 2003, but the actual fabrication didn't start until 5 years later. But it's one of the landmarks in New Orleans, and certainly is highlighted. I think that they have a whole memorial march there every year to commemorate that. And I know that Tim constantly gets people sending him pictures of how it's being decorated, like at Christmas time. They have wreaths around there. So it's kind of nice to know that it has that kind of a emotional response from people for that artwork. I had done a hotel here in the Palomar Hotel in Washington, D.C. It's in DuPont Circle. And the art consultant who was in Atlanta had seen one of my sculptures, my small scale sculpture that I think actually the Sanders have in their living room. And they said, can you just stretch it to be 6 feet high and 5 feet deep? So we actually went back and forth on how we can achieve and make it a new sculpture based on their concepts. Erwin Timmers does a lot with recycling. He just recently completed a large commission for a residential complex just outside of Washington, D.C. that referenced a lot of his use of recyclable materials, and talks about the environment and what is something that we should be more focused on. And he's done it throughout the whole lobby that you're wandering through these lit LED panels.
So we started working together as a studio, being the 3 artists coming together and working together on these projects, which was initially a little bit odd for competitions, because people were expecting a single artist to be the representation. But we put all of our names on it, and actually in the 15 years that have passed since we started, now it's become much more common to see people asking for artist groups, or sometimes even bigger groups of people working together to come together on a public art project.
And part of this is talking about what we mean by public art, and by the name by the name itself, you can kind of understand that it's some kind of artwork that's seen by the general public. Sometimes it could be a site-specific commission that is in front of a corporate office building, or in the lobby of a residential tower. So it is that kind of work that we're talking about, where it's large scale, it has a lot of people using it, and the funding can come from Percent for Art programs or private foundation grants. There can be community sponsorships where they're saying that they want to have something in a community and they're going to fund that. There can be individual fundraising that's generating the funds for that. And it was just something that you might say, well, why would an artist who works on their own work want to do public art? And it does give you a chance to work in other materials and different scales. And puts your work in a completely different context. And that can be a thing that an artist really responds to. In these days, we also see it as a way to diversify your income stream, because you're always going to be saying, if I can't sell in a gallery, is there another way that I can get my artwork out there? And that becomes an attractive way to start approaching it. It also is a thing that you're going to be saying, like, well, how do you get there? And we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. Now, there are a lot of things. I'm going to be showing you a lot of pretty pictures, and it's always nice to see what the projects look like in the end. And if it was well lit in an attractive setting, these are really stunning pieces. You know, the artwork is in great scale. I love the grandness of it, but there's a lot of steps to go from the original concept to a finished piece. And there's sometimes travails and obstacles that you have to overcome. So I think that's where we're going to be saying is, how do you get there? And yeah. I'm going to see if there's anyone who's got any questions at this moment right now.
Yeah, let's do some housekeeping for just a second, Michael. Thank you. If you do have any questions, as you can see, Mike and Erwin are going to pause the presentation a few times during the talk. Please just put your questions in the chat feature, probably on the middle of your screen on the bottom, as they're doing the talk, and Dimitri and I will keep track of them. But are there any questions right now, or should Mike and Erwin continue? Why don't you continue then?
All right, well, very good. Well, unfortunately, most public art starts in a very boring way with lots of paperwork, trying to find the opportunities that are out there. We've listed a number of sites that we use, but a lot of those are going to change depending on what area, what region you're in, what state you're in. Sometimes calls are limited to artists from that state or from that region. Sometimes they're open internationally. It all depends, and they're all different. But you can see a couple of them listed here. Since glass is a little bit difficult to transport over large distances, we tend to sort of stay local. We've had a couple of projects that we have gone out of state, but generally speaking, we stay around here. At the top there's a big difference here between the request for qualifications and request for proposals. Generally speaking, we try to go for the request for qualifications, because a request for proposals really means that you have to put in a lot of work that you will probably never see anything back for. Sometimes if we are sort of on a short list for something and you have a request for proposal, then it becomes worth the effort to put in to get a proposal in front of the people that are looking at it. But generally speaking, a letter of interest is the biggest effort that we're putting in. Yeah, so here you go. So once you get these calls, we're applying, you get the, let me see, you got the request for qualifications consist of usually a letter of interest. It sort of depends, different ones ask for different things, but a letter of interest usually makes you think about the project and makes you sort of, guide the people into what direction you want to go into. Sometimes you're asked for a budget, which is going to be very rough and very draft because you don't really know yet what's all going into it. Always you have to show slides of the work that you've done before, and sometimes 10, 15 slides. I guess slides is an old term, but images, JPEGs of work that you've done, and a resume. So a resume pretty much lists what you've done, and also usually lists whether you've done work in a similar budget range.
Yeah, I mean, you are, when you're applying for this public art kind of work, you are going to be the businessman. You are going to be saying, I've got a background, I can be trusted. It's a lot of times a government entity that is somehow nervous about handing an artist money because artists are crazy and they'll run away with it drinking and never see it again. So you have to kind of show that you're stable and that you can be following a program for the deliverable.
So now comes the point where you've made it to a short list. So usually there's 3 or maybe 5 artists that get a notification. All right, we'd like to know more about your work and or what you might think about doing for this specific site. So that's always the excitement part. Then you start thinking about, ooh, all right, so what can we think about doing for this? Usually involves a site visit, which sometimes is a construction site. Sometimes it doesn't exist yet. Sometimes it's a remodeling. It really differs, but it does become very important to go visit the site because it often gives you additional input and additional inspiration of what you'd like to do. And then, let me see, okay, yes.
It also gives you a chance to start meeting who some of the key players are in the selection committee. You won't be meeting all of them, but it gives you a sense as to who they are, and you might even sound out what their real focus is. It might be that they really want community involvement. It might be that they're very sensitive to themes that they will say they don't want it to be one way or another. So that's where you're going to be trying to draw out of them as much information that you can possibly get.
And so, and then you start drawing and designing. We sort of do it old school. We're lucky to have Mike, who's got great rendering skills and architectural background.
And I'm old, so I do things old school.
There you go. A lot of people do this with CAD. We don't do CAD, but we do make maquettes and models. And I think that renders a little bit of a more familiar, what do you call that, sense to these models. People can get it a little bit better than in a CAD visualization. And we often try to wow the crowd with something spectacular because this is your moment to shine. So you really got to make your maquette look the best. And, glass often sparkles with light. And so that works to our advantage.
That's the magic of glass, because, you bring in a cast glass piece or a fused glass piece and you show that as a sample that the reviewing committee can actually hold and touch. We have had meetings where they jumped out of the chair and grabbed that piece and claimed it as part of their office decor from now on. And you're happy to have that kind of response. You pray for that kind of response from a reviewing committee.
Yeah, so we do not get all the samples back.
No.
All right, so now you get an engineering firm involved because you want to make sure for your protection and for the owner's protection that you are designing something that is going to withstand all the wind forces that are going to be down there. And so we've worked with the same structural engineer for a number of times now, and luckily this person is quite interested in art and doing a little bit different design than he normally does for buildings. And so it is important to find somebody that is willing to work with you in that, because you're going to come up with questions that they normally don't get asked. And so in our case too, we often wanted something way more thinner gauge and more minimal than he was proposing, but he was saying, in order to keep this thing from falling over in the wind, it's got to be this thick and it's got to be like this. And major structural below ground is also important.
Yeah, some of these things too, this is mostly going to be exterior work if you're doing a large scale sculpture outside in a plaza. If you're doing interior, you don't have that same things, but there are times when you're going through a stone clad wall in a lobby and then discover that there's a 10-inch gap before the support structure. You got to be able to figure out how you get something that holds up your glass and steel sculpture. We actually have made files since we have used some other structural engineers so that we know who's a compatible working partner. And it is a thing that you have to start figuring out in your budgets, that you might have some engineering costs that's part of your budget to allow for that.
Always. All right, so here is the major paperwork area. So a contract, they're going to vary greatly between whatever entity you're having this contract with. Often our contract was with the contractor who's building the building, and those contracts become very long, very involved, and involve lots of stuff that really has no significance for us, but still it's written into their standard contract. So sometimes you have to fight with them to take stuff out because it really, you know, it has nothing to do with us. And then we would be charged, for instance, cleanup costs if we're not cleaning up after everybody every day. Insurance, the same thing. The insurance requirements, again, vary from job to job, and our insurance writers vary all over the place because of all these different requirements. And then you have to shore up again once the requirements run out, and like a couple of years later, you do not need to carry that same rider anymore. Permits, we've been very lucky that we've had the help of either the contractor or the owners to
The agencies.
To get the permits for us, because that is a major pain in the ass if you're trying to get a permit just for an outdoor sculpture. And then we usually go on to getting our steel structures made in an outside shop, because our shop is not big enough to make those sort of things. And so we need to come up with some sort of way to communicate with the shop, which usually involves shop drawings. Sometimes we can use the structural drawings, at least as a basis. But that becomes an additional either expense or time that you have to put in to make sure that your shop understands exactly what you want. And then in the end, there's always written in the contract that we have to specify what kind of maintenance needs to be done and what needs to happen in order for this piece to, you know, stand the test of time.
Happily in glass, it just means we're going to wash it every now and then. I like that.
Hose it off.
Yeah. But it is a thing that you actually have to read these documents that you're signing away at the bottom saying you're responsible. Now, when it comes to our legal ones, we've been happily able to rely on Erwin's wife, who's a lawyer, to kind of read through and saying, circle this and say, you want to talk about these kind of issues. So that is a thing, again, where you're going to need to, if you're an artist, developing a network of people that you can start relying on to support you in this.
There we go. So here's the fabrication. So you can sort of see the size of the structures. And I usually, we've worked with many different shops, and I found out that there is quite a bit of a quality difference between shops. And so I have to be on top of what they're doing, frequent visits to make sure that what they're doing is indeed what we want, because sometimes they do see things completely differently from what we are drawing for them. But it's also good to have a good relationship with the shop, because, you know, you're going to be on their toes.
Mm-hmm. Now, we're going to do a case study. Now that we've gotten rid of what all the background is, we're going to take you through a whole project. Now, I don't know if we want to use this as a pause break.
Yeah, let's pause for a second, Michael. There's some really excellent questions. So I'm going to take two of them now, or maybe three, if you don't mind. Let's go back to the beginning, and Tim, if you want to jump in, I'm okay. Maybe Michael and Erwin aren't, but yeah, I think it would be fine too. So first question we got is like how, maybe think back to some of the beginning installations that the studio did, but you know, how can you really make your RFQ stand out? You know, maybe you could tell a story of one job that was a little puzzling. You know, there's some beginning folks here that would like to, Steve Doro, that would like to get involved in public art, and just hasn't quite gotten to the point where people have really, you know, chosen his proposal.
Well, Steve has done a number of really strong public art pieces. And I know his work, so that's why I'm just commenting. So I think that a lot of it is he's got a leg up on a lot of people because he has a strong background in it. A lot of the things, when you say you have an RFQ, read that RFQ and repeat what they're looking for in your proposal. Because some of the people who are reviewing the submissions might not really understand it, but they understand what they were given as a basis of judging. So repeat what they're saying. If you're saying that they want bright colors, talk about how you respond to bright colors and that you're going to be providing this with bright colors. because they're going to be ticking that off. If you say, I just work in limestone and that's it, it's just going to be a soft buff color and that's all I work in, and look at the wonderful shades you're going to be getting in it, you're not going to really pop to them. The more that you can say that I'm addressing your concerns, the better your piece is going to be read. Because just understand, the person's, or even if it might even be electronic now, so it could be a bot that goes through these submissions, are just looking to see that you have that background. You are going to sometimes, if you're starting out, to say, I have a background on a $200,000 project, that's going to be a harder sell. You might not be able to get in. You might have to start building up incrementally to say you've got a $20,000. And I know our first projects were stuff that Tim and Erwin had done for places like the warehouse in Washington, D.C., where they had done inserts in the lobbies and things like that. There were smaller scale commissions that we then started building up to do other projects. And we had projects that we did not have as grand a piece, but that builds the basis of your history in working in art.
Yeah, and I'd want to add too, and we're going to touch on that later too in the whole presentation, but if you can collaborate with somebody else, or we've had mentorship here too, where people that, have worked with us, worked for us, they have part ownership of what they're making, and they use that as well in their applications for future projects. Like Matthew Duffy, he's, he's gone on to make all sorts of public art, and he started small. The first pieces he was putting out, I think they were in the range of $3,000. So it doesn't immediately lead to a multi-$100,000 project, but as you work your way up, you'll get there.
Yeah, Allison Sigathy is another one who's been doing a lot of artwork in the DC public schools. So she's found a lot of a niche in her market. She doesn't always work in glass, but it really was kind of nice that she's been building up her own background in that kind of field. So you always are looking to support other people, because you never know when you're going to have to rely on them. So that is something we will be talking about as well.
Let me ask you another question, if you don't mind. That's coming from some of our public. So again, let's kind of talk about an artist or artisan, gallery consultant who just hasn't had any experience in public art. That's a tough sell, I would imagine. Do you have, Erwin or Michael or Tim, do you have any advice for someone in that situation?
I would say it depends a little bit on what kind of work this person is making already, right? If you're going from, pencil book sketches and you suddenly want to make a grand monument, that's going to be impossible. But if you have sort of larger scale wall work already, that would be a big sort of in-between step to getting an outside mural. It's all in steps. It's all in increments. I think very few people go from, just very small to really big in one go. Maybe if you're lucky.
If you're an artist, you're going to have a learning curve too, that you're going to start learning that that's going to be a problem, and that you're going to say, you can't just stretch something 10 feet tall that was actually 16 inches. You've just got a problem with scale on some of these issues.
How did you guys, as a studio, I said guys, but I realize you often have women that are involved in all these projects. You already mentioned Erwin's wife. You've got great studio managers over the years. And you're talking about incremental jumps. So from the mid-range, which maybe is $50,000 projects.
That's a good size project.
How did you step up? I mean, were there other people that you got to help you, or how did you get to that?
You're asking how to go from 50,000 to 200,000?
Yeah, or 25 to 75.
We did not have a specific policy for that. I think we just started applying in those ranges, and on a couple of them we got lucky.
I think
it's
our
just a
first
lot
big
of
one,
line.
the first big one is going to be the one we're going to be talking about in just a second. It's the Library of Congress.
Oh,
And
great.
that was our first large budget. Everything else had been 80,000 or under. And right now, I'm quite happy to stay in that $80,000 range because there's a lot more, it's more nerve-wracking the higher the budget goes, and it also becomes harder. And certainly if you're looking at like a $2 million project, I'm saying, number one, you've got international big guns that are coming in for that. And it's going to be a lot harder to get a leg into that piece. But it just becomes a lot more nerve-wracking because you're now responsible for so much more.
Okay.
Michael, could I say one thing here?
Yep.
I think also over that time of doing these smaller ones, we started building relationships with many of the committees and people in charge of public art in our region. So very quickly they learned they could trust that we would have a project and that it would come to completion exactly as they had hoped. So once they start trusting your work, then it becomes a lot easier to advance to a larger scale.
Yeah, they're willing to have the risk and they're willing to talk you up during the selection committee. And I actually do judging sometimes for projects that I'm not on. I will avail myself to places like the DC Commission and be one of the judges of the incoming public art projects. So I'm able to, while I'm doing that, seeing exactly what these submissions are and start saying that's the correct way to approach a submission, that they really just knocked the socks off with that one, and comparing it to another artist who had just pretty much said, here's what I do, it's twigs, I'm tying them together and sticking them in the middle of a plaza and saying done. Or he's a sign painter and the project asked for a freestanding sculpture, but he only talked about painting the ground plaza. And I'm saying, am I reading this wrong? Or am I just not seeing that he's following what they've asked for?
So why don't you, this is a fascinating study.
Yeah, why don't we just keep on going?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take you now on a case study, and this is one of our milestone ones. This one really had made us go from smaller scale to larger scale in the projects, and it was the Library of Congress. Now, the original building, this is the Adams building, which is rightly behind the ornate original building, has these huge 11-foot bronze cast doors, and the bronze work was designed by Lee Laurie, who, if you know American sculpture, he had done a lot of the sculpture at the Rockefeller Center in New York. Very much of the era, the WPA, the Depression era artwork, and the artwork is all based on different mythological figures that had brought laws and different kinds of writings to mankind. So that's what they are. But the bronze doors over their 80-year lifespan weren't operating properly. And you also had all sorts of code issues that have changed where they need security, they need fire escape access that a bronze door that doesn't quite close properly wouldn't provide. A person who had done a workshop in our studio had moved up in ranks so that he became the second in command at the architect of the Capitol. And he, when they were saying, how do we handle these bronze doors being changed, he was able to propose very boldly that they would reimagine the doors in cast glass. And that's a big leap and change. So we had, starting in 2004, been doing written proposals as to what could be done with that. We started writing up some of the specifications for that, giving them a hand. And every year we would submit a proposal to be the artist for that change. So starting in 2004, we didn't get a go-ahead until 2012 that we could go ahead and do that, just to show how long it takes to get some of these projects done.
Well, we were also not the only ones that were writing proposals.
Yeah.
I've heard from many other artists too that they'd seen the request for proposals coming across their desk as well.
And they want, this is the architect of the Capitol. You have heritage people involved. You have all sorts of people who are part of the selection committee, and they all have their concerns. How accurate, how true to form. They want specific details that says this is an exact one-to-one copy of that door. And it was a larger project than we could actually have delivered on our own. So we actually brought in another artist, Fire Art Glass, which is Ray Algren out in Portland. And he and Jeff Woolen and their team, we worked together on making these cast glass doors.
So in a way, this project was different from most of our public art because we did not have a main say in exactly what the imagery was going to look like. We were using Lee Laurie's images, but reimagining them in glass. It did call for some changes, and we had to make adjustments and move them up and down and remove certain steps in the original sculptures. So in a way, you know, you can see it as sort of meta art, where we were making art about the art that was already there in a different medium.
And it was a very complex one where we had to take molds off the original bronze doors. And that's where one of the artists who worked in our studio, Sean Hennessy, he had come in and he had a background in mold making. So we relied on him to do a lot of the mold working on the doors. And we had made these in a lost wax process. So you're making an original that you're then pouring wax in, then you're pouring plaster around the wax, and then you're melting out the wax. And it was a many-step process. And it was during an incredible heat wave here in DC that we made the molds, that the doors were slightly bowed, and we had to fix all of the changes in the that happened in the metalwork in the wax forms that we could make them true to a new door. And so Erwin actually had to go back and forth to Portland to review this.
Well, the whole process was so complicated that the architect of the Capitol and the contractor had really no idea of what went into the process. And they all wanted to know what the heck was costing so much money. And so we brought them out on a field trip to see exactly what all goes in, you know, starting with the rubber molds coming from the door, the wax is going into those rubber molds, the wax is being splayed out, and then glass being molten in. And it was, they were actually very impressed. The lady you see in the red coat over on the left, she actually delayed her retirement from the architect of the Capitol to see this project through because she was so fascinated by it.
And you see a picture here of Ray and Jeff Wallen loading the glass in the kiln. You know, they're able to handle a very large scale production of it, and they met such exacting standards. And you're divesting the glass, and then you're doing many steps afterwards. We had to chisel out all of the detail from the glass. And as you know, chiseling in glass is one of those scary kind of times that I worry about what's going to happen. And I think we also had to sandblast it and then acid dip.
Right. Well, since this glass was being used as a door front, it had to comply with lots of codes, but also you don't want fingerprints to start showing up the first time somebody touches it. So the surface of the glass was sandblasted and then acid etched. The acid etching sort of takes away the bite of the sandblasting. And then Rain-X applied so that fingerprints would not stand a chance on this.
Yeah. But the end result was beautiful. The glass was spectacular. However, they were really reviewing and seeing they were scrutinizing everything. And if you work for the federal government, you find out you don't get paid a penny until it's all finished and installed. So they were starting to say, oh, there's a bubble, there's a bubble. And in cast glass, you're gonna get bubbles. So we were just biting our nails saying, we're gonna lose money as they say, up, bubble, 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 take it out. We actually had to bring in an expert to talk about glass, and he had said that this is pretty much state of the art. It's not factory made. This is state of the art for handmade glass. And that calmed them a bit, and we were able to proceed. We had 2 panels that were rejected. So one went to us and sits in our studio lobby, and the other one went to Ray, and he has that in his studio. But it was beautiful, beautiful glass.
But convincing the architect of the Capitol that machine made versus handmade was a big thing. That took us some time.
Yeah.
The person we brought in was William Warmus. We flew him in, the former curator of Corning. We had to fly him in and have him at a meeting so that as soon as they objected, we said, well, by the way, we do have the expert in architectural glass. And he stepped forward and said, this stuff is great. So it was a chance we took, and it worked out well.
Yeah, and that was really when I first met Bill Warmus. And he also had said he's going to come in, and if he doesn't like it, he's going to say it. So are we willing to have that risk? And the answer was yes. The Glazers who came in and did the actual installation in the bronze doors all wanted a picture taken with them holding a glass piece. And it was, a piece of American landmark history that we're part of. And I really was happy to be there as part of that. I think American Craft then, hearing about that, did a story about this process of that. So it is one of our milestone projects in there. and it looks great. They had us do all these tests to make sure that the bronze wasn't affected of the original bronze doors. And then they stripped the bronze and refinished it. So anything we would have done would have been clean anyway. But the finished project, it really just looks spectacular. It's so bright and shining. And another thing too, when they had the cast glass, they never realized how the sculpture, which they only perceived on the outside as a sculpture, was also read on the inside as a negative form, so that you suddenly had the light pouring in, and at night it becomes the other way around, where it becomes, the light comes out of the inside of the building.
The power of glass again.
Yeah, and then here's the proud papas. Yeah. So here's a place we might take a pause, Howard.
All right, we'll give you a
For
quick-
pause, water break. There you go.
First of all, we have a comment from Vanessa Cutler, because one of, in the audience, once someone asked about weather and how glass holds up, but Vanessa Cutler pointed out that an example of Coulter's work in New York, it's an example of man-made glass in situ, and that certainly has lasted. I'm assuming if you all have any concerns, do you have any concerns with your glass lasting through storms and storks bumping into the walls by accident? And
We've actually weathered a storm and an earthquake. The earthquake happened right as we were sort of in the midst of installing. So not all the glass was secured, and indeed one piece had not been properly secured and it suffered some damage. And so we redid that one. But basically, we design the holding mechanisms with so much additional strength that I'm not worried. We also try to keep the surface to a minimum, because if you're talking about large surfaces of glass, they're going to be much more vulnerable than smaller surfaces.
Yeah, and the glass we're using is a strong material. It's not thin glass. We're using a very solid chunk of glass. Some of the pieces, we actually had a project where they were worried about glass, saying that people are going to damage it. And we had our studio coordinator take a slingshot and see if he could break it. It was the happiest time he had ever worked in the studio. And all he could do was take out a chink of glass in the center, and that was it. So it felt pretty good. We did have one project where they were concerned, this is for the EPA, where they were saying, well, birds sometimes take a rock and they will fly over. A seagull will pick up a rock and fly over and drop this. And if it crashes through this piece that's in the middle of their landscape garden, it'll break through. So we gave them a lifetime warranty for any damage caused by rocks dropped by seagulls. We haven't.
I would add one thing too.
Contract. I don't think that ever got written in.
I would add one thing too. A lot of these, like the library, not the Library of Congress, but a lot of the other ones, we're working with plate glass a lot of times, and the plate glass is already outside all the time. Your window is half outside.
Yeah.
So in that case, we weren't worried as much, although we've also used other types of glass who've weathered very well outside.
If you're thinking about, you know, we have some crazy climate in the DC area, but generally it doesn't get too cold. Again, do you think the glass you're working with, or if somebody is trying to, who is involved in a public art project much further north than where we are in the USA, would you have concerns about the glass, or do you know of any glass projects in, you know, Wisconsin, Alaska, Northern California, Maine, etc.?
No, I think Mike and I once went to a Bullseye conference where we witnessed the lecture on failures in glass. And so we've taken to heart all the lessons learned from that. I think if you treat glass well, if you make sure that it's smooth on the edges, that it's not mounted in a weird way, glass is going to work anywhere. Yeah. I wouldn't see any problems.
It's going to be more of how we set it, so that's within a steel framework or a metal framework, that it does not have the metal expanding and contracting at one rate and the glass at another, that we always have enough of a cushion to allow the movement to happen without damaging to it. And actually, this kind of leads into our next part, if we're ready to go on.
Sure. why don't you continue? Thank you.
All right.
By the way, these
Okay.
questions are wonderful. Keep them coming.
We had been selected to do artwork in the Washington, D.C. area, one of the more underserved wards, where they wanted to have artwork that was a gateway to their community. And they said we're the gateway to D.C., but people just pass through, and they wanted a way to make sure that people could understand that. And in some of the meetings we had with the community, they were worried about what was going to happen if it's glass. If you're doing a glass thing, you have a lot of gang problems there, and that some gangs might destroy the artwork. And I think that, in fact, one of the artists that we knew had their artwork piece there completely destroyed.
Yeah, before the opening, even her piece was torched by some vandals, and so we saw what can happen in these areas. And so to combat that, what we did is we involved as many local people as we could.
Yeah.
I know that we were talked about, or the work was talked about in local neighborhood meetings.
Yeah.
And people are, we're talking about it and involved in making it.
Yeah, actually what Tim had said was, if you have a problem with the kids, get the kids in and have them make the artwork, because they'll be vested in it and they will protect this thing because it's their symbol of artwork in that community, that they will not let anything happen to it if they see that as a reflection of themselves. So we actually then, working with the city, had set up a series of workshops at our studio and brought in the people. So these are people who had never worked with glass, had never really worked too much in artwork. So we gave them a crash course on what fusing is, how we're doing it, different techniques, how we can handle it. And we ended up adding more and more workshops because people would say, now that they heard how successful it was and how much fun they had, and it became a way that the community started binding together, because you had some groups that never knew of the other ones now working together at the same time and making artwork. And what we had done was, we said we designed this so that if you have so many people working on this artwork, that you're going to have a lot of different voices. But we made the color palette very controlled, so that it was, no matter what they did, like any kind of quilt, you would start saying that it all works together because the color theme and the materials were all the same. So they all went off in their own little ways of telling stories. There are different groups that were part of it, the ways that they wanted to showcase the glass, the year that they were doing it in, everything. It really became a thing of how people could express themselves in the tiles. And Erwin went crazy because we had over 300 tiles made by the community, and then we had to trim them all down and then mount them. So that became its own process of fabrication for that.
Yeah, so we ourselves made a lot of tiles that would be in the top arch, and a lot of the community tiles were in the uprights, and putting it all together also became a whole sort of artist endeavor in itself.
Yeah. Well, we had the
Making
ability
sure it works together.
Yeah, we had the ability to curate it and say, this one goes to that one, and that one, that goes into the extra box, where if anything happens, you can dig out that box and say, here's a replacement tile. And there were some that we would actually have to make a couple tiles that would be the bridging tiles that would just kind of blend it from one style to the other. But it really was a great, exciting time, because you had some people who never had a chance to work in this media, and they were just thrilled at the chance that they were able to do something. Some of them wanted to keep their tiles, me to say, this is for the community, it's not for you to keep. But I like that kind of involvement with them. And the finished
Michael,
product.
do I have something? Is it okay if I say something here?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I'd like to say that's an important distinction, because from this point on, and even before this, when we present for the next public art piece, we can say we are going to involve the community in making artwork for their own neighborhood. And so that has helped not only get us some wonderful projects, but also makes the community where the project's going to go to feel a lot more attached to that piece. So keep that in mind. Involvement of the community was very crucial in getting a lot of these.
Yeah, yeah, Tim's right. I think a lot of public art calls now sort of require the artist to do more than just plop something on a concrete block in front of a building. They want to see more involvement with the community, more involvement with the building, better tie-ins with the building, with, in this case, it was a healthcare center. But we listened to the community talking about the green arch, and what do you see? This is a green arch. And so it becomes so much more when you have all these people involved.
Yeah, and it really turned out to be a very attractive project. I mean, the scale is a thing. You have people who are looking for the tiles that they made. The piece is also illuminated, so at night it has a presence that you don't have to have floodlights on it. And we have made the panels so that they can be removable in the case that, knocking on laminate, that if there's a problem, we can change out the lighting as well. But it all has been fine. This is 2014, I think, and it's still been going really good.
So someone just had a general question about the lighting. Why don't you talk a little bit about what you've done in different projects?
Well,
I don't know enough to ask you an intelligent question about lighting, but if you would.
for us, LED lighting is, since it's now become so much brighter and so much better, it is the way to go. It's also very energy efficient, which I like, being environmentally conscious. But it also puts out very little heat. Floodlights too close to glass could bring too much heat to the glass. And they're also mostly very weatherproof. And so you can mount the power source usually away from the actual light. So the power source is probably the first thing to fail on these things, but this lighting, it's not going to have any problems for the next 20 years. And then maybe the power source can be replaced by what will be at that point a new and improved power source. The LEDs last forever, pretty much. It's the electronics surrounding the LEDs that have more chance of failing. But I love them. They come in so many, brightnesses, and I love also how they spread out your light. You have to diffuse them a little bit to get rid of the individual dots. But once you've done that, it becomes a beautiful lighting.
So a little teeny bit more detail, Erwin. Pick a panel. Where is the LED light, if you don't mind talking about it?
So we have, we like these triangular forms, so you can actually mount the LEDs on the inside of each of the poles of the triangles, and that way they will illuminate the panel directly across from it.
Cool.
And that's one of the reasons for choosing this triangular form.
Okay.
And it makes it very sort of elegant in a way. That's how our last lady talked about it. Very elegant solution. So they're LED strips mounted on the inside of these poles. They go all the way. Here you can sort of see them.
Yeah, you can see it through the arch part.
Yeah.
But also that triangular shape structurally is just a better shape. I know that 3 points is a better thing than 4 points because the triangle is a little bit more stable than a square. So it just worked well for our concepts.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay, now that, what Tim had said, had really become the basis for a lot of our other public art projects, where we started looking at saying, we want to have community collaboration. We had done a project for the Laurel Library, and because we were doing workshops with the community, the Baltimore Sun did a story about it, and this is for their new library in suburban Laurel, and we were saying that the theme is books and reading and stories and history. So we had people coming in doing—
And dinosaurs.
And while there's a dinosaur, there's a history of dinosaur stuff, yes, and dinosaurs. And there's also things like they referenced a church that was across the way, and people came in with their books, anything that came, really pretty much, as long as we can say you can put it in tile, we'd say that's good enough. But we had all sorts of groups, friends of the library coming in. They were coming in different kind of bus loads were coming in to do work in the glass. You had whole families coming in there to do that. And
well, this was a very nice, concise project, because there was a pre-existing group called Friends of the Laurel Library that was a support group for this library, and they were most invested in getting a beautiful building, a beautiful art piece outside of their building. And they were very enthusiastic and happy to show up and drive down from Laurel and come do the glass here.
And the finished piece, this is a triangular piece, and it really responded to the architecture of the building. The architecture was very dramatic, and we just kind of made the forms resemble it. And in fact, when the building got a AIA, an American Institute of Architect award, they actually had said in the description of how they chose the building, they actually cited the public art in front and how it was tied in with the whole of the building. And I thought that, you know, ex-architect, I'm feeling, you know, the chest puffed up with pride saying I'm part of that.
Yeah, well, part of that is also because we were involved from the very beginning. The building was a destruction site when we first saw it. The old building was coming down,
Yeah.
and we, you know, we were basing our design on drawings that were sort of changing week to week. But we had many meetings with the architects too to make sure that where it was going to go, how it was going to look, and that our design would work with their design.
And since we did a lot of different styles, you can have that sense of ownership where the neighborhood will call us up if they see someone putting stickers on the thing to say, do something, because they feel as though they and us are one entity that are going to take care of their building. And I like that kind of sense that they have ownership of an artwork piece that's in front of a public library, that they will showcase it when they have visitors. They say that they want to show it off as though that's their point of pride, to say, I live here and this is my artwork because I had made a tile in there. And it's also very tactile. You have kids who are running around to figure out what the stories are. There's Puss in Boots by the girl's hand. And I remember that was one of the person who made it was so proud of that tile.
Yeah, I think the county executive remarked at that point that all artwork
Should
in
be like-
Maryland
yeah.
should be like that. Yeah.
We had another way that we were asked to involve community, and we had done a series of workshops with the community to say, what are your aspirations and dreams? This is for the William Beans Community Center, which is also in suburban Maryland. And we had a series of images that they were voting on to say, this represents them for different generations, helping people, America, health, and then they started saying, we also want things that showed what their activities in the community center. So they started skewing us in one direction to start showing the activities, music, drama. So that became one that we also had responded and had to come over all sorts of structural issues that we didn't discover until we were getting ready to install.
Yeah, and in this case, the community involvement went a little bit differently because the community didn't actually make any of these pieces, but we were there working with the community to have them make their own pieces that they then were able to take home, unlike those unlucky folks from the medical center who had to leave their piece in our tower,
Yeah.
or in our arch.
Yeah. This is another project in Peppermill where we talked about, said the theme of this is what you find important for your community. So a lot of them talked about nature and family. Some of them had religion issues that they wanted to be explored. And so that became just, again, how you express yourself. And our newest studio coordinator, Terry Swinhart, was there. And she had a chance to start using heavy power tools. Erwin installing the piece. They also had directions about how tall it should be, and is there a seating area that we can incorporate it for people who are waiting to be picked up. All those kind of issues became added on to the design of the artwork as well. And then the finished piece in sight, and being lit at night really adds a lot, because it, you know, certainly in the fall season through the spring, it just is a landmark that you can see from down the block to from the parking lot entrance all the way to the building. It just kind of draws you in. And again, it just became a strong, colorful signifier for that community.
Yeah, and people again here, they know their community center by, you know, whether it's lit or not, and the tiles that they put in. I heard later there were a couple of infiltrators from a different community center that put their tile in there as well, but we did not know this at the time.
Yeah. Now,
You must put in the crab, I would imagine.
Crabby, yeah.
That's right.
Ubiquitous Maryland crab.
Yeah.
Now, Erwin's background is in eco art. He really is all about environment and stuff. And so sometimes that becomes a strong selling point to our design. We had done a project for Safeway in their LEED certified building where they wanted to have the glass or what we proposed was to reuse the glass from the original building. He's a superhero when it comes to the environment. So
well, when you know old Safeway buildings, they had a huge glass front. And I was hoping to use that entire glass front to, you know, make glass from the old building for the new building. And that's, you know, that's something that resonated very well. Unfortunately, the huge glass panels could not be separated from the rest of the debris, but we got a lot of glass from the interior of the ex-supermarket.
Yeah.
And then
It's from the refrigerated freezer cases, and it had food all caked on there that we had to scrape off.
hey, there
It
you
was a
go,
little bit
and
disgusting.
partitions, and
Yeah.
there was so much glass in that store, yes.
Yeah.
And so the new glass panels that we cast also referenced, again, items from the Safeway supermarket. We went with various herbs and vegetables and greens. And then we had the partitions that were viewable from the streets, but also from the parking garage behind. And you can see how this is from the outside looking in, how the light from the interior, the parking garage shines through. And the opposite happens during the day. When you park your car, you see all the light from outside coming in through our panels into the parking garage.
It's gorgeous.
And I'm going to talk a little bit about collaboration. I mean, we've worked with other artists. Sean Hennessy had done stuff with the Library of Congress. Alonzo Davis, we had done a project for the courthouse in Upper Marlboro. Ray Algren. I mean, it really does help strengthen your proposals. You start involving other artists, they become strong artists themselves and start going on to doing their own public artwork. Sean Hennessy, who's now in Seattle, he started doing public art submissions and getting projects in Baltimore. He started working with an artist from our studio, John Henderson, and they started collaborating and making their own artwork. And again, that was the way that Erwin started referencing, that you take on another generation, another artist, you help them, and then you start building a community of artists that are a strong point to your studio works. I mean, we do have that as part of our background, is that we're doing mentorship. The past few projects we've been doing is bring in an artist who has no background in public art, but we have them on our team as a person that works very closely. All of the paperwork, the design work, the fabrication work, the installation work, they now have a background in it. And they're able to say that they've worked on these projects because they have worked on these projects and they know what's involved and how to do it.
So Stephen, next time you can come over.
Yeah, you're more than welcome, certainly. And then just giving one more case study just to show how these projects can go. Some of our projects are not fast. You know, we had 2005, a concept for a residential mixed-use development in suburban DC. And what happened was that the economy stopped and the developer just languished. And then later on, we had another developer. Next slide. Yeah. It's sold, and then in 2013, we had another developer come and say, we're going to be designing this, and they had a completely different building design. But since we were approved by the county as the artist, they said, come up with a new concept, and they really wanted it to focus on the diverse cultures that made up that suburb. And so can we do something that really referenced all of the community in the artwork? And in one zone, we had said, okay, we'll look at the tapestries, fabrics, different ways that they use weaving and techniques like that to express the different communities that are of each of the cultures, and we'll backlight it and have that as a feature. And we did a presentation of that to the county to have approval because they were going to say yes or no for that. And at that, after that presentation, they said actually they want to wrap the entire building with it. So they increased the amount of work from being just one corner to the entire surround of the whole facade, all the way on the corner location of that building, including the backside. And so it became a much more involved project. But that project also stopped. And then
but indeed, you see already that the community involvement here is a little bit less direct, but we're responding to the community by looking at what the ethnic origins is of the people that live there. Apparently, and I did not know this even before we started this project, Silver Spring is the second largest Ethiopian community in the United States. And so Ethiopian panels started featuring heavily in the work that we were doing.
Yeah, and then in 2017, there was a new owner, but since it had gone through approvals, they said, we're gonna just pick it up and continue on the previous design. Now, some of the things we're going to be working through with the original designers, architects, here they were saying, just start building it and making it. So it became a much more of a, I think it was 9 years or 12 years between start and stop. And then they're saying, now quickly, get it all fabricated and installed. So we began doing we did essentially a fire on enamel on glass, and then we installed the light panels, and it wrapped around the building. These are, I think, 14-foot panels that went up and down, or different ones that were 2 high panels, but it became a very strong graphic symbol on a very beige building that wraps around the whole facade in Silver Spring.
Yeah, if you drive down this street now, Thayer Avenue, it's a gorgeous sight coming down there, especially at this time of day, dusk. It just stands out. It's
These
beautiful.
things are all brightly lit, and it just wraps around and gives a really strong pop of color. Some of the projects we're working on right now, we're doing an apartment tower in Arlington. We had been giving start and stops where, because of the pandemic, some of the public art projects have been put on hold until they can figure out how they're going to be integrating the construction crews and the artwork. Some of the other large-scale commissions have gone forward. So, again, knocking on laminate, we're able to keep on going. But it is a thing where you're going to be flexible and say that this project might be on hold until next year. So are you able to wait until they say it's June and now we need to be finished by July? So can you go real quick? And some of that is going to be a juggling act, but then what in life isn't a juggling act?
Hey, Mike, is this really, golly, I'm so embarrassed.
This is our finale.
Oh, yeah.
Up, Howard. Don't ruin the moment.
Yeah. Saying, that ends our talk, and that we're welcome you all to come visit when you can. We do have quarantine or lockdown protocols, COVID protocols here, but we're welcoming people again. The studio's opening up again. You can see that there's a lot of happy, smiling faces, including Howard and our dog.
The dog will answer some of your questions if you have any questions.
Please don't ask me, because you know what happened.
But that ends our presentation.
Wow, that was very exciting. Why don't we pause for a half a second? Anyone who wants to ask a question at this point can put your videos on if you want to say hi to our artists. But please just unmute yourselves if you would like. And we can, let's see if I can unmute everyone.
Oh, that's
dangerous.
Nah, I'm not going to do that. That's too hard. But yeah, so there's some questions that people would like to ask at this juncture. I hear these guys are open for collaboration. So besides Steve and Doro, if anyone else wants to work.
Well, we're doing some proposals right now. And we are actually reached out to some artists in town to say, can you be part of these proposals?
Do you try and include a color? I mean, that last thing that you showed before, the cute dog and the new studio coordinator.
Yeah.
Was that actually in an RFQ for that building? Yeah, the color, and you talked about matching it to the color of the building. Do you try and do things like that in your requests for proposals?
Well, we do try to work with the colors of the building. And so you don't want to come up with a proposal that is going to clash with whatever colors they have in the building. So in a lot of cases, we can see what the architects are, what their color schemes are, and sort of, work with that. Or in the case of the Silver Spring building, we became a big contrast that worked very well in that way.
Mm-hmm.
But that color was always part of our presentation. When we did the final presentation to the council to say this is what we're going to be doing, those colors were the colors we showed. And we just had to make sure that we were able to, when they expanded it, that we were able to have the colors not be touching each other as we repeated the patterns in different ways. Mm-hmm. It became a logistics thing of saying, this is the Ethiopian pattern on dark blue, and it's this size versus the Colombian red, that kind of thing. We just had to start saying, we have a cross match of enough patterns.
Gotcha.
I've got a couple of questions. One is, early on you talked about applying for request for qualifications versus a request for proposal. Can you explain the difference and why one is better than the other? And then the other question is when you're looking at calls, are there any red flags? Is there anything that when you see it, you tell yourself, there's no way we're going to touch this one?
Want to do RFQ?
Well, first about the difference between the RFP and the RFQ, you know, I feel personally that for an RFP, you're giving away a lot as an artist. You're giving away designs, you're giving away your work without, you know, getting paid for it or anyway. I mean, if you have sort of a ready-made piece of sculpture that you want to get placed there, then that becomes a whole different story. But that's not the way we work. We make pieces, we design pieces from scratch, and we just can't afford to like start designing things if there's no chance that we're going to get in. So that's why we stick to the RFQs pretty much, I would say 99% of the time.
Yeah, but there is that 1% where I'll say,
Yeah,
I'm interested in it, and I think we have a shoe in, yeah. And I'm gonna say, I'm not proud. I will sometimes say, I got the time, I can do it, I wanna just submit, and then later I never hear from them again because they don't always respond.
And we've also heard of cases where, you know, people's proposals get stolen,
Yeah.
and then
Or
somebody else
shop
uses
around,
it.
they'll
Or,
shop around and saying, we want a little
The owner
column A,
says-
little column B, can you do it for cheaper?
yeah, the owner says, we have this plan, can you make it to somebody else, right? And so it's, and then your second question about the red flags, well, not really. I mean, when you see the listings, you see right up front, like where it is geographically, what the budget is, what kind of art they're looking for, where it's going to be in the location, and some of those things we can do and some of those things we cannot do. And so when it falls in our realm, then we'll usually go and apply.
Yeah, and usually when it's a local one, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna be a little bit more looser. So we have one that's on the tables right now where it's talking, and I'm saying the way it reads is it looks like they want us to do paving, artwork in the paving. And I'm saying, I'm going to submit for it because it seems pretty easy to submit. And I'm going to say that, and I'll figure it out later on what the issues are going to be. Because I just know that you got to submit, because you're only going to get what certain percentage of people are responding back.
Yeah.
And then even of that percentage, you're going to be selected only a small percentage of that. So I'd rather go for it and then deal with the consequences later as to how make it work.
We used to say that for every 10 commissions you went for, you probably got one.
It could
And that,
You're good.
yeah.
yeah, I know, yeah, good. In the UK, we have to do public artworks. When I do public artworks, we have to have a life expectancy, and also they have to have a document about how you clean them and how you look after them for the next 10 to 20 years. We find cast glass, every time we put in anything for cast glass in the UK, kind of gets a, ooh, you know, not sure about it.
Glass, they're scared.
Yeah, I think we're still a bit outdated in our approaches maybe. But also, I don't know if you've had it when I remember installing a piece and somebody said, oh, I'd try and smash that on a night out. You know,
Well, then you have in
honestly,
your contract that you will remake it at a certain cost, right?
But you know, if you had a marble sculpture and you took a hammer to it, you're going to smash that sculpture as well. So
Yeah.
it's not like it's somehow saved by being. Glass is really strong. It's unless it's really thin or delicate, it can handle a lot of outdoor abuse.
totally.
We had two things happen to us that helped us in this. One was the Policeman's Memorial in New Orleans. In the Bywater, one of the most difficult challenged parts of town was a glass panel with etched text and had never been vandalized or broken. Also, the county of Arlington, Virginia in DC had a horrible time with taggers on their little bus kiosks. And they switched it all to glass and with, you know, etched glass in it. Once they came artwork on glass, no one touched them again. So we had two kind of bases for realizing that glass work wasn't any more difficult than others. And then we had, for the AIDS monument in New Orleans, one of the city council members came and said, son, if someone takes the shotgun and shoots at one of those faces, won't the shattering glass on the other side hurt people? And I said, not nearly as much as the bullet. I mean, unfortunately, you can only do so much. Anything can be destroyed. So those usually disarm them if we give them those three examples.
Yeah, and those seagulls dropping rocks, yeah.
Yeah. Well, generally speaking, we're not expected to give a lifetime warranty on these pieces either. Most of the contracts that I've seen, it's a year warranty. So anything that goes wrong with it in a year, you know, and that could be pretty much anything that you're expected to fix. But after that, it becomes property of the owner, and it becomes actually incumbent upon the owner to take care of it.
But we also design it so that it's modular, so that if a piece does, let's say you have a crazy person who shoots through there, I'm able to replace that panel and pop it in, no problem. And it'll be for one tile that's an hour to let the silicone set up and then done.
It sounds like one of the things you all do on a pretty regular basis is to, you know, build a design with relatively small individual panels. And you talked about Erwin, I think that's a really structurally sound way to do things, and gets over some of these problems that people are discussing. Is that?
Yeah, so indeed. And I don't know if you could see in some of the fabrication photos that each individual glass panel is part of a larger frame that is then bolted to the final skeleton structure. And so if we ever need to repair or replace, we have the ability to do so. And we build that in from the beginning, partially to convince the selection committee that we can do it, and partially convincing ourselves that should we need to, it can be done.
Yeah, great.
There is a too small size. I know that we were saying like 5 inches square was starting to be a little bit too small and fussy, because then you can't really see anything through there when you allow for the flanges that hold in the glass, and the amount of time you spend trimming down that glass to that size. I'm saying it needs to be a little bit bigger.
When you guys are fabricating these, at what point does the glass get put into the metal frame for the first time? Is it on the site, or do you do a test fitting before?
Well, like I was saying before, right? We have these frames that the glass gets fitted into, and then the frames get bolted onto the structure. So the structure goes directly to the site and gets bolted into the ground there. And once that is all done, we show up with the frames and bolt the frames to the skeleton.
And they already have
the glass gets adhered into the frames over here in our shop. That way we have the most control. We're not outside. We can have it in whatever position we want to. We can wait. We can silicone the front, the back, whatever we need to, clean it up. All that
silicone is messy. It gets over everything. It's on your clothes. It's all over your hands. So I like having it in a controlled environment where I'm saying I'm giving it the best shot to clean it up. It doesn't have any air bubbles or any kind of pockets because I'm slapping it in and gravity is pulling it out. I want it to be set and dry and clean before we ever put it into a truck.
Yeah, love-hate relationship with silicone.
But we also fill up our studio, and then when you have to lay out all the tiles, that means you have to clear out all the tables, and we're doing all the panels laid out because you have to make sure that it reads as a contiguous design across there. So when we did the Safeway, that was the entire facade of the length of the building. And so we had to clear everything out just to run all the tiles across the floor and say that looks like an even spacing, because it was a balance of color and pattern that we were trying to get.
So I'd just like to read this one for you. Phoenix and Scottsdale support lots of public art. Please bid on projects here so I can help. This is from Ann Falvey, and I'll do my best to get Bandu too.
Okay, yeah, all right.
I like that. That would be good to work with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, if you're an artist, then you're in a specific area. If you want to collaborate with other artists, go for it. It sounds like that's that mixture of ideas and thoughts and talents and skill sets.
Mm-hmm.
So
it is a thing. I know that Tim's been doing a lot of collaborative pieces, and now I'm starting to do it because I just like it. It looks like a lot of fun to start working with another artist and take you in directions you don't normally go. And then sometimes you can pull it back to a way you want to do it. But again, you both learn, you both grow, and you both have something you both can relate to.
Yeah. So about how many public art projects do you guys end up averaging a year or every 2 years, or pick a time frame? Is it terribly up and
I'd
down.
like to think we have 3 big projects a year, but sometimes we have less and sometimes we have more. And I want to keep on doing more, so I'm knocking on this laminate to say that might help me. But, you know, you're just like in the construction industry. You don't know what it's going to be. The economy can change on a dime. Things that you thought were set and done projects that you were moving on suddenly get told it's on hold for a while, and then you hear crickets for the rest of the next 5 years. And then they get called up saying, hey, we purchased this project. Can you guys finish it in the next 2 months? So,
Right, while you already have another project going at the same time.
but you don't say no because you don't know if there's another one coming. So you have to say, oh, okay, yeah.
But that's sort of been, you know, key for us. That it's hard to predict exactly when and where these projects are coming. And so it's been key for us to have a sort of like a diverse income. So we do the workshop teaching, we do individual art sales through galleries. And then these projects, they bring in a lot of money at a certain point in time, but then there will be, you know, they can be few and far between until the next one comes.
Yeah. And that project, we don't really get rich on these projects. We're saying it's going to be paying for the studio. It's going to be paying for rent. It's got to pay for all of the equipment, the materials we just used. So even though it's a big dollar sign, we've spent a lot of money to get that. And the Library of Congress, had we known what it was going to cost, we would have tried to charge more for that project, because we just ended up being barely squeaking by as when you divide up who gets paid from that project to the final thing.
And if you go down to the Washington Glass School, you can see is that tooth. What's the name of the god?
Oh,
that-
No, it's Naboo. We have
Nabu is here, okay.
Yeah.
excuse
Oh,
me.
that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, you can see one of the tiles and you can say what air bubbles were the ones that they didn't like, and that's why it got stayed here.
Yeah, he's the Abyssinian bringer of wisdom and writing.
And pizzas, apparently.
No,
Or is that a law tablet?
that's a book.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Michael and Erwin,
Yes.
I have a question. It's Larry Seabrack. I have a question. Are there agencies or agents that deal specifically with public art, analogous to like galleries, so that artists that are interested in doing public art could register with such agencies, architectural agencies, things like that, that specifically are sort of a middleman for public art? Does that exist?
Well, there's some agencies that are providing sources of, here's a project coming up. So, you know, Americans for the Arts have a thing on public art. Call for Entry is an online place that also does with public art. Certainly in the local councils, I would say start finding out if there's art in public places for that area, because they will have someone who's going to be saying there's going to be a project coming up for a library or a community center, and they would be the ones who need to know that you're interested, and they'll send you an email announcing that there's that project. You also just have to look online to start plugging yourself into those places that do call that. There's a number of art blogs in the area that will publish it, saying that there's these projects coming up, so then you might see it on their email, on their notifications, that there's something you can try for. It is a matter.
Well, there's also a list of art consultants you could approach. Although art consultants, you know, are sometimes hesitant to take on new artists. A lot of them have their stable of artists that they work with. But one of our first projects came from exact such a situation, that an art consultant had gotten into a bad situation with artists and the building owner fighting. And so she needed somebody to jump in and take that spot, and we were the ones. And that's how we got one of our first projects. So sometimes you just have to be at the right spot at the right time, but putting as many feelers out there as you can is always a good idea.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Well, from the bottom of my heart, I'd like to thank all 3 of you from the beautiful things that you put into your surrounding community and other areas. I'm sure many people benefited from hearing this talk. And I know that if people contact you, you'd be probably very willing to be helpful and or take some more questions.
Yes, always happy for more collaborations, more, you know, if anybody has a question after the fact too.
Or if they wanted to
Please.
commission us to do some enormous lobby, Happy to talk with you.
You know, the baker's rack behind me could use a little sparkle. So for myself and Demetra, we both want to thank all three of you very, very much. And we're looking forward to hopefully some wet weather in the west. So
And
that
dry weather in the Panhandle
South,
area.
yeah. Switch things around, yeah.
and just from Demetra and myself, thanks very much.
Thank you.
October 20th is Lucy Lyons, so hopefully we'll see you back, and thanks again.
All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank
Great
you.
job, guys.
All right,
Excellent.
you did it.
Excellent. You spoke well.